Alrighty, so week 13 behind us, week 14 heading at us. And it's been an interesting week in the world. I volunteered at the election center this year, and I'm glad I did. It really helped me understand kind of how things work at a basic level. And anyway, I think, here's the thing I would say, our democracy is not necessarily a spectator sport. We should participate at whatever level we can. And for me, I had a few hours I could give it. And so I did. And I'm glad I did, because I think it really helps me understand this whole what's happening right now, because it does take time. Holy mac, it does take time, especially if you don't start counting until the day of. So anyway, interesting week in our world. For us, we're at an interesting spot in this class, right? So we're moving into week 14 with the 18-week class, which really means we're 4 weeks away after, as we move into week 14. And as we look at our last dev, our Dev 2. I've talked to many of you during your code reviews. At this point, I've completed 95% of all the code reviews that were of all the code that was submitted. So just keep in mind, right? There'll be no code reviews after the end of the semester. They all have to happen within that date. And so I'll talk about the date as we move a little forward. But conceptually, what are you working on? Well, you can think of this week as helping you start to understand the idea, right? If you got the idea of what a constructor function is, the idea of a template that sets up values that you call new on, that you can then have methods and other, right, internal syntax to handle all the things we're used to, which is arrays and other things. But it gives us a structure, a way of building out objects that instead of an object literal, this is a substantiated object. You'll very commonly hear that term. I remember the first time I heard it, I'm like, substantiation? Creating objects. Oh, okay, creating objects. I got it. But it's a new way of creating objects that has a lot more functionality than we see in a typical object literal. And it gives us a standardized way to also attach and handle, prototypal inheritance, which basically means, right, we can inherit through what's called the chain, the prototypal chain. So not that you have to even understand all that. Really, basically, like this week and what the code that I wanted you to write this week, right, was just basically not having any input boxes, just setting up a new order. And you could have done this either way. Now, in my code, I ended up doing it a little differently than many of you. I noticed looking at some of your code, looking at the code this morning. So it's good. I mean, you're prepping this. So here's what you can know is that basically there's 3 options for Dev 2. You can take and rewrite your Dev 1 in a class. Now, class is the next iteration of constructor functions, what are basically the same, except we have the class actual syntax. And the reason, from what I've read and understood, they added the class into the newer versions of JavaScript as there are programmers coming from Java, coming from C++, coming from whatever language that we're used to. And a lot of what they did was built on this idea of classes and having classes that you instantiate your objects. So JavaScript, to kind of help those folks come into the fold, because many people are coming, JavaScript has been now rated in various ways as the #1 programming language used in the world, in the US. I don't know if it's the world. I shouldn't say that. So that's why they did it. It's basically a syntax sugar. But as long as when you start to understand these concepts, it will help you. So you can, option 1, going back to my discussion of Dev 2, is to take what you did for Dev 1 and refactor it into a class, okay, using the class syntax. So for me, if I was to do that, I would take my game concept and then I would build that game class out and then instantiate that game and then do all the things I would normally do to a game and handling as much of the functionality of that inside of the class. I may still have things outside of the class, but most of it should go in. And I did give a little caveat that if you handle local storage, I'll give you even a few points extra, meaning you handle it in your class. But anyway, so that's one option. The second option is something we're going to start moving into as we start building out the Hangman game, which is really doing API calls. And this is one of the things I think I'm going to do a code example for, is actually and it's kind of similar to the way we're being introduced to the idea of a class via, a constructor function. We'll get the similar thing when we get to API calls, which is we're going to basically use callbacks. And then we're going to iterate to the next level, which is actually using async await, asynchronous calls, because imagine you're asking for something from the web. You have to be able to handle on a delayed basis, because anytime you ask for something from an outside source, even a folder on a network directory, or even on your own directory, it's going to take time to read through something. So your code has to be able to handle that delayed response, because the way JavaScript naturally works is that it just executes immediately based on either just running your code or on the user input. So that's your second option, is you can do that. And I think that's what I'm going to do, because I've been wanting to give a code example for that. So third option is pitch me an idea. Like what is it based on these last sections do you feel like would really help you? Like, is there something different you want to do? So think about those things as we move forward. So the other thing I wanted to give a shout out to Jason is Jason has been great about doing attendance and doing his learn togethers ahead of schedule. And I really want to appreciate him and give him a shout out, because one of the things he said last night, and he said he really feels like that we would benefit from learning more about how dev tools and how to use dev tools. And I would agree. And I think adding that in the curriculum as I think about running it next semester will be something I'll do. I'm not going to require you to use dev tools for your code review for your last dev 2, but I hope that by the amount of time we've spent on it, that if you didn't already see the benefit of using some kind of debugging. And remember, DevTools is just trying to make it easy for you because it's in the browser, you're already there. But VS Code itself has these same type of tools built in as well. Any kind of coding, you're going to have some kind of debugging tools. So I thought what I'd do here, and then just the last part of this, is show you, because I noticed, and nobody mentioned it that I saw, is that my code had an error. It was undefined here. And I was like, I can't believe I didn't catch that, right? So I thought what I'd do is actually, I'm going to have it open locally, right? So I'm running the live server, and I already have it up. It's over here. I'm going to close this one real quick. This is actually the running locally. It's undefined. So one of the first things you can see here is that if I just right click and I hit inspect, right, because my code does not have any point, let me close that, right, there's my app. I only have one app.js. Because there's nothing in my code that is asking for user input, right, the breakpoints in that case, depending on where I'd want to stop it, right, so I'd have to figure out where this undefined is coming in at. So one of the things you have to do is first be able to just read through your code and kind of understand it, because if there's been a little lag between the time that you wrote it and the time that you've come back to it and you're having to figure it out, right? You might have to kind of look through here, but one thing with dev tools you can do is just set that breakpoint at the very beginning of the file and then restart it. And what it's going to do is stop right there at the beginning. And you'll see, and this is really good just to do, is just to watch it. Watch what it's doing. So notice it's right here at the beginning. If I hit step into, it doesn't actually execute the inside of the function. The lines of JavaScript in here, it just sets these functions up. It does do a syntax check to make sure that they are actually, doesn't have any major syntax errors on it, right? So now I have my two constructor functions set up. I know that I need to call them. Okay, so that works. So now it's just moving through and it's looking at my, and in this case, functions, but we know them really as function constructors at this point. So now we're actually at the point where we're going to execute something. So now we're at this line. So again, I can just hit step into, and now we're back up here, but this time we're actually executing this. And that's what and in general, the first time as you're getting used to this, I recommend just kind of setting that breakpoint at the beginning of the file and then just use the step to step into every part of it, right? So there we go. So I know that in this case, I'm not doing a return because the constructor function by its nature, by calling new, is going to return based on the things I've given it, either passed to it, customer, or something that it does in itself. And in this case, it's setting up time. So then as it returns control back to the next line, and that's really what it's doing, it's returning control back to the next line. Now I'm just going to execute that, but I can scroll up and see that my order is there. The other thing you can do is you can just type order 1 also in the console so that you can break that down and look at that. Oh yeah, that's an object. That's what we've recognized as an object, right? It's got a key value pair. I could also just do order one dot, right? Customer to also just, oh, is it right? Let me see if I got that right. So, but the idea is in general, you can use, I forgot. I didn't spell it right. That would help. Got my text way too low. Oh, and look at this. So this is the other thing it does, is that it actually tries to help you, by actually giving you a list. That's the other thing. There's just so much information here, right? So if I want to do that, so it allows me to really drill down either from the console or from the interface here to really help me. So I could walk through this. So what I'd want to know is when, because if I was troubleshooting, I'd want to know at what point in the code am I going to get to the output. So I just keep walking through. I'd like, okay, so now I'm setting up the line. Okay, so now I'm going, oh yeah, so that's where actually, in that case, it's returning a string. Okay, so that returning string, so it's going to call line. Okay, so again, I'm stepping through, I'm understanding what it's doing, I'm understanding what it's passing around. And so at this point, I haven't presented it to the page because that's a method that I have. So in this case, I'm doing a method on the object, the substantiated object, the order, right? That's what that order is. Again, here. So, okay, so now so now I'm setting it up to do the print itself. Okay, so it's somewhere in there. So I'd have to look in here and I'd go, yeah, this dot line number, and I must have accidentally put an M on that. And as soon as I do that, and then let's write it again. Oh, because I still have that breakpoint on there. Let me just take those breakpoints off because I don't need them any longer. Hit that. Oh, yeah, it worked fine. Okay. So I know that's a very simplified version, or just a look at it. But in general, I just recommend at the beginning, as you're still learning how to use the dev tools, because there are, by the way, a lot more besides just debugging your code in here as well. You can set a watch to watch for something. You could you can look at the call stack to see what's called, like if you're a couple of functions in, like what called what, so you can see what originally got called to start that process that you're looking at. So I guess in general, my point, I'll come back here and make it, is that use it. And then, ask, I mean, that's the other thing is like, I have to say with Jason's comment a couple weeks back, like there was a little bit of a disappointing. There wasn't more people on Discord. That's true. And I could see that. And this class has definitely pared down to a smaller number. And, but I would just still encourage you because we could still definitely help each other out. So when you're trying to troubleshoot something, right? And maybe it's just hard. Maybe that's part of what happens here. It's just like I'm embarrassed to ask, and and I think trying to get over that is a really good thing. Like getting over the fear of somebody else judging you. Right? Know that there's a smaller number in here. Our goal is collectively to have us all learn and extend our knowledge. And I mean, I feel like I learn something new every day when I'm doing this kind of work. Okay, so next week, just a preview. So that was week 13. Looks like most of you got some output, which was awesome. And so in week 14, what we do, not a big surprise, we actually cover classes, right? So, and I talk about how, take my code, make it better, because it definitely could be better. It was kind of a, one of those like, you do a first draft and you might think I purposely did it. No, I just kind of in my head took a make it work. And then generally what you do when you code, first round is just make the thing do what you want it to do. And then you come back later and make it better, make it more efficient, or eliminate redundancies where you have them. Right. So that's what I want you to do is like take my code, right, and study it and figure out a way to make it better. I think that's a really good experience. So I hope you enjoy that. I know it's a little longer than normal. Have a great weekend. It's a little windy today. Let's get some rain. Yes. Have a good one.